Welcome inside this week-ending edition of Big Ten Today, fueled by Gatorade. Rick Pizzo, thrilled to be joined by Anthony Herron. I got you right. You're hooked with the Taylor Swift.
Oh, I will definitely be sticking around for that, man. My girl T Swizzle.
Yeah,
I've been on camera with her before. I got to tell you that story sometime.
I know it's not exactly what you expected. Probably not what you expected either. Trust me. We'll talk plenty of Big Ten sports. Our focus mainly football as training camps start to wind down and the season gets closer and closer. Our big story focuses on the training camp where our crew is on this Friday, and that's in Iowa City. Kirk Ferentz, how about a quarter century, now starting number 25 as the head man. Hawkeyes return 16 starters, 8 on an offense that was much maligned through much of 2022. But of course, you have a couple of all-important transfers, including that guy, former Michigan quarterback Cade McNamara, now expected to be the guy for the Hawkeyes under center. But there was a little bit of concern this week. Cade McNamara earlier in practice, scrambling, fell weird with his right knee, took himself off the field, walked off into the tunnel with Iowa's training staff. This according to Scott Docterman, who saw it in person. Now, Kirk Ferentz said, not a big deal, not alarmed. It's not like he broke his leg. That would be really significant. It's going to be one of those things we have to take day by day. Hopefully, it's on the shorter end than the longer end. Now, we can tell you that Cade is not practicing on Friday. Precautionary reasons right now, according to Iowa. So let's not get too far ahead of ourselves and try to play doctor and assume he's going to miss a certain amount of time or not miss a certain amount of time. But we do know he is the guy who we expect to lead this Iowa offense. Assuming he's healthy, how much of a difference does that make for the Hawks?
We can confirm his leg's not broken.
Kirk
Ferentz did say that, so hopefully that's at least a comfort to folks in Iowa City because they had like their friends and family day out at Kinnick and a bunch of fans are in the stands watching practice. All the collective media is there as well. And I've talked to several folks since that day, and the collective gasp in Kinnick went from a non-contact bugaboo, boo-boo, injury, something. Cade McNamara goes down, takes himself out of the lineup. But it is reassuring to hear since then that he's not expected to miss any significant time because he is the key to Iowa's offense. I mean, there are very few players in the conference that are the linchpin for their team's success or lack thereof, like Cade McNamara will be to the Hawkeyes this season.
And this is him from today, and by the way, at practice, obviously there watching but not participating.
Yeah, I mean, it's good to see that, he seems comfortable. A little bit of a smile, a smirk on his face there. So we like seeing that. So as long as Kirk Ferentz is comfortable, Cade McNamara is comfortable, if he's in the lineup and playing like the Cade McNamara we saw lead Michigan to a Big Ten championship and a college football playoff berth a couple of years ago, then there's no reason to expect that Iowa's offense won't greatly improve. Now, maybe not be on the Ohio State level, but this should be a much improved Iowa offense with Cade McNamara behind center. And, there's a reason that they were very aggressive in the transfer portal to go get Cade McNamara because of the many pelts that he had on the wall. The Iowa Hawkeyes were amongst them in that Big Ten championship game a couple of seasons back.
They also got his former Michigan teammate, the tight end, Eric All, to go along with Luke Lachey. Should have one of the best tight end groups that you'll see anywhere. But the question is not whether the Iowa offense is going to be better, because you need to see some type of improvement. I think more of the curiosity is, will the Iowa offense look any different? And this is a conversation we seem to have all the time. There is no change with the OC. Brian Ferentz is still the guy. And Kirk Ferentz is still the man on top of everybody making these decisions. And I tell anybody who will listen, why are you really going to consider wholesale changes at a place that in a quarter century has never really seen wholesale changes?
This is not what they do. It's not what Kirk Ferentz does. He's a guy who's sort of built on consistency and continuity. It's a part of what's led to so much success that he's had over the years. And, I've said this before a variety of times. I didn't have as big of an issue with Brian Ferentz, the play caller. I did have some questions about the QB development over the last couple of seasons in Iowa City, but there have been a variety of times. We're going into year 7 with Brian Ferentz as the play caller for Iowa's offense. There have been quarterbacks who've put up numbers there in the past, offenses who've achieved at much higher levels than we saw in Iowa City the last couple of years. So having an experienced quarterback transfer in, an extremely confident quarterback transfer in, and an enhanced offensive line with additional playmakers around them. Even the running back, Caleb Johnson, who set a freshman rushing record last season, him coming into this season, he's one of these names that I believe will continue to emerge throughout Big Ten circles behind that offensive line that should be much better this year, assuming health. A lot of guys who've started games together, and there's not a group, there's not a position unit in football that continuity and cohesion matters more than up front on the offense.
And now that Jake Rudock IOU has been crossed off, nobody owes anybody anything. We're even Steven until we get it, and we'll settle it on the field. Defensively, Cooper DeJean is back, and in my mind, he is probably one of the guys who is talked about less than he should be nationally. In the Big Ten, people certainly know who he is. If you watch Iowa football, he's a jack of all trades. He can play every position. He can do everything well. He's just a pure athlete and a great football player. But folks outside of the geographic footprint of the Big Ten don't pay attention to this guy. I think he has a chance to break onto the national scene this year, especially if they use him in as many different ways as I get a sense they might.
I certainly hope so. And I know that the conversation has been there really even since they first recruited Cooper DeJean, because he was so exceptional at so many different spots at the high school level. He played some quarterback, he played some running back, he played some wide receiver, he played DB, he was a return specialist. He was all over the field. And so when he got to Iowa City a couple of seasons ago, I mean, I covered him in the All-American Bowl. He was down, you know, it wasn't a season where we got to see everyone in San Antonio, but got the opportunity to sort of feature and focus on his recruiting journey leading him to Iowa City. It was some small nowhere town in the state of Iowa, and he immediately showed he was capable both physically and mentally of competing at the Big Ten level. And then last season, he was one of the main playmakers in the Big Ten Conference, and is the reason that he was the guy who was picked by Cleveland.com in their informal sort of preseason rankings as the Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year. I think there's a few different players worthy of that conversation, but Cooper DeJean is no doubt one of them.
Yeah. He's obviously also a great special teams player. You don't want to tire him out. You don't want him to do too much, but he's a guy you will rely on greatly. But it's not like he's by himself on that defense. It doesn't really matter the pieces that get changed. Phil Parker just kind of sits back there very quietly, does his job as the DC, doesn't ever really flirt with a head coaching job anywhere. Just
quietly is a subjective term with Phil Parker, but yes.
Quietly in the public and in the media, not with his players. Yes, exactly. He is as intense as they get. But he does seem to pull all the right strings each and every year, regardless of the personnel. They don't change their scheme much. Right. They don't get super complex, but everything they do really well. And again, we should not expect that to change in 2023. This should be one of the best defenses in the Big Ten.
There is a lot of talent that returns as well. You know, Cooper DeJean just one of those individuals, but, you know, even though you lose Riley Moss to the National Football League, other multiple players, Jack Campbell at the linebacker position, guys in the front seven who have gone on to the NFL, it's still going to be an extremely deep and talented defensive front. You have Noah Shannon, who once he's healthy, he will be back in the lineup for Iowa as well. Joe Evans, their leading sack artist really over the last couple of seasons, back for yet another season in Iowa City. Aaron Graves, a young defensive lineman who's really expected to sort of perform big things there on Iowa's defensive front. And so beyond Cooper DeJean, you know, on the back end, Xavier Wangpa, a guy at safety who was an even higher level
talk about Wangpa
than Cooper DeJean. I mean, he's a guy who's shown similarities in the skill set of being a guy who played a variety of positions at the high school level with outstanding ball skills that Phil Parker really likes to recruit towards because they focus on taking the ball away so much with that Hawkeye defense. So there's no reason to think there's going to be a big drop off. I mean, we've seen historic levels of defense in Iowa City the last couple of years. Even if they just drop off a bit,
they may not be there.
Yeah. Right, but it's going to be an outstanding defense.
It's hard to keep that level of consistency and excellence that long with guys like Campbell and Moss and Van Ness being a top 10 pick as well. So let's finish here with the Hawkeyes, their status in the West. That unofficial poll, which you referenced, had Wisconsin as the top team in the West. But there are questions there because Luke Fickell is installing a new offense. You have a new quarterback. Braylon Allen is back. But there are some questions with that transition as well. Illinois lost a ton. Purdue, the defending Big Ten West champ, has a first-year head coach coming in. I look at this in the final years of divisional play in the Big Ten and think to myself, once again, Iowa's got a really good shot to come out of the West and end up in Indy.
I'm not sure that I've ever picked Iowa to win the West Division before. I'd have to sort of cycle through my memory bank, so it can be faulty at times, but I believe they're the favorite to win the West this season. At least in my mind, they should be. We've seen the history that Wisconsin has and how they've been one of the teams that have dominated this division over the years. But in the last edition of the West, we can be confident. We should be confident in what Luke Fickell will build in Madison. But when we're talking consistency, continuity, proven commodities. There's no team in the West that has more of that this season than the Iowa Hawkeyes, between the leadership of Kirk Ferentz, coordinators at all positions, not just Brian on offense, where, yes, they have growth on offense as we just got done discussing, but the spectacular defense, the fantastic special teams led by LeVar Woods as well. So coordinators intact, each side of the ball at a high level. So I do believe the Iowa Hawkeyes are the pick to click in the West, and I'm not really sure that there's a strong case to be made elsewhere. It won't shock me if Wisconsin bursts onto the scene with Phil Longo's offense and all the talent that returns on defense that should be better. But as far as what I know, the tangible evidence that was there from years past coming into this season, I was the surest bet.
No surprise to see Nebraska women's volleyball back in the AVCA preseason top 25, tied for 5th to start the season. Only one Big Ten team, Wisconsin, is preseason ranked higher than the Huskers. The Badgers are at number 2. You see a handful of both current and future Big Ten teams inside the top 25. And don't forget, Nebraska's annual Red-White scrimmage comes your way Saturday night, and we have it for you on Big Ten Plus, 7 Eastern, 6 local time from Lincoln. In advance of that scrimmage and the season, we're excited to welcome in Lindsay Krause, outstanding hitter for the Huskers, into the show. Lindsay, I promise you, we are going to start this interview in a fashion that you never imagined. I'm not going to start with volleyball. I'm not going to start with anything sports related. I want to start with your love of Taylor Swift, because I understand you're one of the few that got to see the Eras Tour this summer in Kansas City. How good was it?
Oh my gosh, it was so amazing. It was, I've been joking around with people that it was the best night of my life. I am an avid Taylor Swift fan, and a lot of my teammates make fun of me for it, but I love her music so much. I love her, and getting the opportunity to go see her in concert with the hectic schedule that we have, it was honestly just a dream come true. And I joked that I was in the last row of the Arrowhead, but it didn't matter at all.
So did you go the full route? Did you dress up in an era? And if so, what era were you?
I didn't dress up in an era per se. I was just so excited to be there, and I couldn't choose my favorite album because people always ask me that, and I'm just not able to pick one. And I just couldn't decide.
All right, well, I'm glad you told me that, because I was going to ask you what your favorite album was, so we'll leave it at that. I will admit, I have a daughter who's also a Swiftie, so I've become a little bit of a Swiftie dad, like by osmosis. So I'm a big fan as well. I'm a Lover guy. I think that's particularly the best album. But we have looked at tickets. We have looked at tickets, and as obviously you know, they're ridiculous. Could you put a price tag on it? How much would you say it was worth?
I don't know how much it was worth, because I think if I didn't get tickets, I would have been willing to pay an ungodly amount to go.
Right. Fair enough. Did she perform your favorite songs that night, even though you don't want to narrow it down to one?
Yes, actually. She performed Long Live, that was on her Speak Now album. And it was a surprise, and my show was like the first show that she performed it on. And I started crying when she sang it.
Man, I'm glad we started this interview like this. We have gone a lot deeper than I thought we would, but I'm glad it worked out this way. I do want to obviously get into your background in volleyball as well. Now, you committed to play for the Huskers in July of 2017. That was before you had played a minute of high school volleyball. I know you're a native, you're from Omaha. Why did you know at that point as a teenager that it was the right decision?
I think before I was given that offer, I was very open to opportunities. I wasn't going to narrow it down or put all my eggs in one basket. But as soon as I got that scholarship offer, it just clicked in my brain, even though I was only 14. Why would I go anywhere else? This is home for me. My entire family lives in Nebraska. The culture, everything that surrounds this university and this program, it just wouldn't make sense to go anywhere else.
So how has the reality compared to the dream that you had as a 14-year-old?
It's been a dream come true. Being able to say that I play every home game in front of 8,500 fans that care and want to be there and support us no matter our record, no matter our standings in the AVCA or the Big Ten. They show up every day and they know us. They know us by name. They care. It's just an amazing experience.
Do you and the rest of this team, and I did have the chance to chat with Lexi Rodriguez and Coach when they were here for media days talking about the fans and the support. Do you realize how rare that is in not just college volleyball, but in every sport? I mean, the amount of love and attention that you guys get being kind of the only show in town, it's really something that's unique to college sports.
I think it really sets in when we get to go on our away trips, especially within the Big Ten, because we have such a fan base, not even just in our state of Nebraska, but it's completely widespread throughout the whole country. I'd say there's some away games that we go to that don't get the biggest crowd, but there's more Nebraska fans at our game than there is of the home team.
Yeah, I've seen it before.
And
I know you're telling the truth. It's absolutely amazing. And you have plenty of fans on your own campus, too, including coaches of other teams. I know that Matt Rule kind of photobombed you guys when you were having lunch one day. What was the conversation like with the new football coach?
He's a really great guy, and he actually catered that lunch for us. Our training table was closed, and he catered this lunch for us, and he got to sit down, talk to us, really get the inside scoop of what we're doing. We got to ask him questions about what he's doing differently in the football program. And it was really cool to know that somebody of that high status done some stuff that he's done, coached at the pro level, the college level. He cares about us. Yeah,
he's such a cool, humble guy, too. You see that picture, he's kind of making fun of himself with the face, immediately posting it on Twitter. You have the red-white scrimmage I mentioned coming up on Saturday. It's also part of Fan Day. We've already touched on the fans. How much fun is this particular event for you guys as a team, knowing that it's always important, but at the end of the day, it's a scrimmage and it's for the fan base to kind of get their real, true first look at what your team's going to be?
We use this opportunity as something that is really important for all of our people that haven't played in front of this big crowd, to get them acclimated before they really get to play in an actual match. It's something really cool for everybody to get to see, that very first look, like you said, of the Huskers playing the Huskers. And a lot of times we joke that sometimes this is going to be one of our best matches for a little while, just because we have so much depth in our program. And no matter who's on what team, it's going to be a very competitive scrimmage. And then we also like to make the joke, come out and support the Huskers. We're definitely going to win tonight.
There's no question about that. You're also favored to win in about 2 weeks in what is probably going to be the coolest, most anticipated volleyball match, maybe in the history of the sport. They expect 90,000 inside Memorial Stadium, Volleyball Day in Nebraska, when you take on Omaha. I don't want it to overwhelm you guys, but clearly this is something that nobody's ever undertaken before. How much conversation has there been about it, and what are your thoughts about what you guys are going to be doing on August 30th?
There's been some conversation about it for sure. Coach said last night how much we should be excited for it, because nothing has ever happened like this in the history of the world. And obviously that got a few giggles. But we're really thinking about how this is a really big match for us. It's going to be making history. Although we do have 3 matches before that we need to focus on first. And then we got to focus our attention into this stadium match, and how it's going to be unlike any other. And we know that there's going to be nerves. There's going to be crazy. Nobody's ever played in this experience before. And we're not going to be able to really fully prepare for how it's going to go. But that's okay. It may look a little ugly. It may be beautiful, but we're going to work through it.
Got the chance, as I mentioned, to talk with Coach Cook during media days. And one thing we did talk about a little bit was your move from right side to outside, kind of your more natural position after you kind of fit into that right side more based on the rotation of the last couple of years. He said in the spring he saw exactly why it was so natural for you and what you were able to do. How does that change what you do and what your, I guess, impact or role on this team will be this fall?
I think no matter what, being on the court has always been a goal of mine. And regardless of what position that is, it drives me to be my best. And I think playing the outside this year is something that I am a lot more comfortable with. And being on the right side the last couple of years was just kind of like a role spot. And I knew that we had to fill that role in the team, and I wanted to be that person. But I think getting to move back to the outside this year, we as a team are going to be able to really achieve our goals, I think, just because me being back on the outside is more comfortable for me. And even if I'm not on that starting role, I'm going to be able to push our starters every single day in practice, and that's going to be ultimately best for everyone.
Great to catch up with Lindsay Krause, not just her love of Husker volleyball, but the state of Nebraska and Taylor Swift as well. Lindsay, we appreciate the time. Wish you the best of luck this weekend, obviously on August 30th, throughout the course of the entire season. Thanks for having some fun with us on Big Ten Today.
Thank you for having me.
It is time for today's big stat. Today's one of those days I wish the viewers watching and listening at home could be inside our studio to see and hear what's going on during our commercial breaks. We have gone off the rails on Friday morning. The big stat lists the last 3 Big Ten teams to win the Joe Moore Award. That goes to the team who has the best offensive line in the country. Iowa won it back in 2016. The last 2 years, Michigan has won it. And our analysts that were there on Monday believe this may be a better offensive line in 2023 than they had either of the last 2 years. So we'll hold off on Michigan for just a second.
Possible.
As Rick Pizzo and Anthony Herron are back with you, it is time for the Big Five. And as you may have guessed, we're going to rank the top 5 offensive lines inside the Big Ten. Why don't you start us off counting down from 5 to 1?
So I weight these groups towards proven commodities. So Ohio State won't make this list, a spoiler alert, but we'll see where the Buckeyes end up during the season. Just not as much returns.
Too many new pieces.
Yeah, Donovan Jackson's really good, though. So let's start in Iowa City. I have the Iowa Hawkeyes as the number 5 offensive line in the Big Ten Conference coming into this season because there is a lot of continuity. There are so many starts that this group has had together. And yes, some guys have been in and out of the lineup via injury, but Mason Richmond is extremely talented. Nick DeYoung has played a lot of football, and he's really good. And as key as anything, Logan Jones at the center position, Kirk Ferentz is so excited about the development that he's seeing from that young center because, he didn't really get that opportunity. They didn't move him to center until going into fall camp last year. So he was just really figuring out snapping the football, getting out of his stance, calling all the signals pre-snap. So they do think they've got a far more competent and capable person helming the inside of their offensive line.
It's never easy in that first year to be the guy after the guy. Yeah. And Tyler Linderbaum was that guy for a very long time in Iowa City. So Iowa comes in at number 5. Who ranks just ahead of the Hawkeyes at number 4?
So the Wisconsin offense was a group that was pretty maligned last season for a variety of reasons, but their offensive line at times last season, it wasn't up to the Badger standard, but there were plenty of drives, plenty of games last year where Wisconsin's offensive line was that. And they return starters this year as well. And not only do they have returning talent up front that started a bunch of games for the Badgers last season in an offense that was dramatically different than what we're going to see this year with whatever version of the air raid that Phil Longo is going to bring to Madtown. But then also you have starters from Cincinnati transferring in as well. So there's going to be a lot of experience. There's going to be the ability for Luke Fickell to say, you know what, if I'm not really liking the mix for this particular game, let's mix it up a little bit and try some other things. There should be a lot of competition, for the Badgers and making sure that guys are pushing each other to continue to improve in this new system.
It's going to be fascinating to see how many fewer 8-man boxes Braylon Allen has to run into this year behind that offensive line with Tanner Mordecai and maybe a more, not pass forward, but more balanced offensive attack under Phil Longo, who you mentioned before, isn't afraid to throw it all over the yard if that's the case. And certainly Tanner Mordecai has already done that in his college career. I'm fascinated. You have Illinois at number 3. They did lose a ton of talent and experience over the last, not just year, but last couple of years from the O-line, but they have some nice pieces back as well.
They do, and they've got 3 different players who got all Big Ten recognition last year, and so having that level of talent returning, that matters a lot. And then also it's going to be another year in the Barry Lunney Jr. system, and that matters to me as well, where not only the continuity of starts next to each other, but continuity within your offense, and that matters so much. It should be a big part of what will help Luke Altmaier to feel that much more comfortable being behind center in this Wisconsin offense. And then even a young player like Josh Kreutz, who may end up stepping in at center as their starter at that spot. We certainly know there's plenty of legacy there with his dad, Olin Kreutz, you know, a potential future Hall of Fame level player after his career with the Chicago Bears. So there's talent that has played a bunch. There's other young talent that's on the way there. There's a system that they understand and balance, like you referenced, to that offense. Julian Pearl, now he's not a guy who's going to be viewed as the best offensive lineman in America, but he's going to have an NFL future. He's going to continue to open some eyes this season. So they do have a stud level player up front on offense in the line.
And even though Brett Bielema has been around the Big Ten forever, he's really still kind of in the infancy in terms of recruiting to the way he wanted to recruit in Champaign. That offensive line, you have to think, will just get better and just get deeper for as long as Brett Bielema is in Champaign, because that has been one of the hallmarks of his coaching career. At number 2, this is a fascinating choice, and I agree with you, by the way, because for all the success James Franklin has had at Penn State in his decade there, the one knock, the most common, stable criticism of this team is, when are they going to get a really good offensive line? They have a really good offensive line.
Finally, it took years. It was music to the ears. It was a symphony to the eyes of Penn State fans to watch that play out last season, because there's been so much uncertainty, inconsistency up front, and offensive line play that just wasn't meeting the standard that we come accustomed to in State College. And I think a name that James Franklin talks about a good bit, his offensive line coach, Phil Troutwine, when he brought him in a few seasons back, we've seen a steady, consistent build in the coaching of that position group, in the recruitment of that position group, and then having Olu Fashion, who come back for yet another season. Where I reference, maybe Julian Pearl isn't the best offensive lineman in America. It's because the best offensive lineman in America resides in the Big Ten Conference. It is Olu Fashion, who could have gone on and been a top 10 pick in the National Football League. But, you know, he's not even old enough to order an adult beverage yet. So he came back for another season to get his degree, to continue to mature physically and mentally. And the offensive approach that they will utilize there in State College, sort of a more brutal approach than we were seeing in years past. Now they have the potential to do that.
Spoke volumes during media days in Indianapolis. You asked James Franklin or the Penn State players that were there about, man, how good are these young running backs? How good can Drew Aller potentially be? What about this offense? They all said to a man, it starts with Olu Fashanu up front. We're the best offensive lineman in the country, and we are going to rely on him game in and game out. They may have the best offensive lineman in the country. There are a lot of folks, including some who work over here on this desk quite often, who believe that Michigan may have the best offensive line in the country.
They've earned the respect to be, called upon, to be spoken of in that sense. And there's no other unit, there's no other team who's been able to win back-to-back Joe Moore awards. And the still somewhat brief history of that award, Michigan was able to pull that off the last 2 years. There hasn't been a season we've gone into, though, where we've talked about Michigan being 10 deep up front. Not only whoever ends up being their starting lineup could be a potential Joe Moore Award winner, they're going to have a second unit that could potentially win, at least compete for the Joe Moore Award this year. That's how deep Michigan is up front. What Ohio State has become to the wide receiver position, where everyone wants to be in that Ryan Day offense, that's what the folks at Ann Arbor have become on the offensive line. The line of scrimmage, as much as Jim Harbaugh values that, and the way they operate offensively with Sharon Moore, end up, sort of featuring their O-line in a variety of ways. There's not another team in the country who's been playing offensive line in recent seasons like the Wolverines. And I mean, it's crazy to say that this may be the deepest unit they've even had.
There was plenty of talk after we saw practice on Monday, not just about how physical they looked, but how physical they sounded. You could hear them coming off the line of scrimmage, those pads popping, those helmets crashing. That's going to be the hallmark of this team. As good as Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards and J.J. McCarthy, as skilled as they are and fast and talented, it's going to be their physicality, because there's not many teams that are going to be able to match up with the Michigan Wolverines. Pretty amazing when you think about the fact that over the last 53 years and change, Iowa has had 3 permanent athletic directors, with Gary Barta retiring this year after 17 years in that chair. On Thursday, interim AD Beth Goetz was officially introduced by the Hawkeyes, and not surprisingly, she is really excited about the opportunity in front of her.
This is Iowa, and it's the Big Ten, and the opportunity to come be a part of everything I knew about who the Hawkeyes were was just something that I just felt like I had to do. I wanted to be a part of this team. No one, no one in the country can take a look across the department and say, hey, we have that experience, the success, the tradition, the type of people that Iowa has. So there's just no way really to measure that, except for to recognize each day how fortunate we are to have these Hall of Fame coaches that are running around our halls each and every day.
Actually, there is a way to measure it. Years served by guys like Kirk Ferentz, started in 99, Lisa Bluter 2000, Tom Brands 2006, Fran McCaffrey 2010. Those are 4 head coaches. What I get up to about like 85 years combined between those 4. It's amazing.
That's one of the things that intrigues me with this situation that Beth Goetz finds herself in. Right now, still the interim AD tag, but it's an athletic department that, for whatever reason, in the 4 years that I was there in Iowa City, went through a lot of turnover for major head coaches. Dan Gable steps away from the wrestling program. Dr. Tom Davis stepped away from the basketball program. Lisa Bluter took over, like you referenced, the women's basketball program during my time there as well. And of course, Hayden Fry ended up retiring after my sophomore season. So for whatever reason, I chased away a bunch of outstanding coaches. And now this next handful of years, it seems that there will likely be some similarities to some turnover in major programs within that athletic department. And so whether it's Beth Goetz or whomever leads Iowa athletics into the future, is going to be people having to make big decisions in those roles.
Big time hires. Let's transition, though, from familiar faces to some new faces which have expectations that match up with the same expectations that face those who have already been there and done it in the Big Ten. And Luke Fickell, in a way, has been there and done it in the Big Ten, but now in a big role at a new place with high expectations. Wisconsin, he steps in year 1, is expected to win the West.
And I like the fact that, as much as I've talked for a couple of years now, just wondering whether or not the Paul Chryst version of Wisconsin football was going to be able to forge an enhanced path towards the future, not just competing for a division championship in the Big Ten, but really being a team that can win the conference title, that can compete for the college football playoff and national championships. Luke Fickell steps in, and he's tweaking the Wisconsin formula. He was a physical coach. He was a defender. And at Cincinnati, they were a physical football team, defensive-minded. So I don't think Wisconsin fans need to worry they're going to get too far away from that. But he is modernizing things within the football program, in some ways, within the entire athletic department. And certainly the offense is the most immediate sort of example of how.
Same division. I don't think the expectations are the same for Matt Rule, and I think that's because the last few coaching hires haven't worked out in Lincoln. And I think this fan base, which always wants success and which is such a great and supportive fan base, also understands maybe it's time to be a little bit more patient, because Scott Frost came in as a former prodigal son with so much bluster and bravado, and he was ready to win the Big Ten in the first year. I don't necessarily think anyone expects that. They just want to see measurable success in year 1 under Matt Rule.
It's interesting that Matt Rule seems to be a guy who sort of combines some of the traits of the last few coaches that have been there, where, Bo Pelini won a bunch of games and had an approach, a style with his team that demanded a lot of them day in and day out. Didn't always get along with the media. Was a bit gruff in that way. Matt Rule is a demanding guy. He expects toughness and physicality, but he's got a bit of a Mike Riley kind of vibe with the way he addresses folks publicly and with how approachable he seems. And then also there is a level of youth and vigor that comes with him in a similar fashion to how Scott Frost was able to bring that as well. So I do think there's an intriguing combination of some of the recent hires, and Matt Rule sort of embodies a variety of those traits, and he's had success building programs at multiple spots, and there is no program in the country more hungry to be rebuilt than the Huskers.
And I think it's going to be a fascinating development because the fan base will love him. Yeah. They probably love him already, but when they really get to know him, he is such a likable guy. Yeah. At the end of the day, you got to win games for that fan base to continue to love you. And obviously, he'll try to do that like he did at Temple, like he did at Baylor. It's interesting when you look at Ohio State because they have had such great quarterbacks that we start to think, oh, there have been no recent quarterback competitions in Columbus. That wasn't necessarily always the case. Yes, Dwayne Haskins emerged, was amazing. Justin Fields transferred in, was amazing. C.J. Stroud was phenomenal. But I think maybe with the exception of Fields coming in, there was always a little bit of conversation who's going to be the guy. This year, there's a huge question about who's going to be the guy, and I'm not sure we'll know whether it's going to be Devin Brown or Kyle McCord until probably the week before game number 1.
I'm glad you point that out because I'm really looking forward to seeing how the combination of those two talents are utilized by Ryan Day. I mean, I asked him about it in Indianapolis when I saw him there, whether or not there was even the potential that multiple quarterbacks could be in the mix going into the regular season, and he didn't rule that out because Kyle McCord is extremely talented and he can move, but he's not nearly as mobile. He's not the improvisational style of quarterback that Devin Brown is, and Devin Brown had to miss the end of spring football, so that competition during the spring was cut just a bit short. How funny would it end up being? I would find it rather comical if you see Ohio State end up deploying maybe a similar sort of tact to what Michigan did last season, where not only does the quarterback competition go into the regular season, maybe each guy gets a start at some point early in the year as well, because both guys seem to be performing at a high level on the practice field, and you're going to get slightly different styles of play from each of them.
Worked out pretty well for the Wolverines a year ago, didn't it? When they eventually settled on J.J. McCarthy. Let's go back to the West and Illinois. Tommy DeVito, in my estimation, didn't get enough credit last year because he wasn't a stat stuffer. He wasn't one of those electric, jump out of the box, in your face kind of guy. But he did so many good things for Illinois. I wonder where they are this year in terms of the pass game, and not just at quarterback, but on the outside as well, other than Isaiah Williams.
That's the thing. We know Isaiah Williams at this point has been a guy who's continued to develop as a wide receiver, one of the most electrifying playmakers in the Big Ten, really, when he gets the football in his hands, and he's only expected to get that much better. But he's kind of the main guy who's proven. Pat Bryant was a guy who had some moments last year, had some individual games. I was able to call, kind of the coming out party for Pat Bryant when he was just running all over the field, flying all over the place, catching footballs, running after the grab, and we didn't see that consistently, but having depth at wide receiver will make a huge difference. And Malik Elzy, he was one of the top receiver recruits in the country. Brett Bielema was able to get him to Champaign, keep him in state. And I do think he may not be a guy who's going to immediately emerge as their number one target at wide receiver, but where Luke Altmaier is a different personality than Tommy DeVito. He's not quite the guy who comes in with all the bravado in the world and sort of gets everyone galvanized right off the jump. But he is a guy who's played the game, who's made quick decisions, and to have a variety of targets. Malik Elzy, I would say, is probably the most purely physically gifted receiver they have in that room. You add his youth and confidence into it, I do believe we're going to see an introduction for Malik Elzy in the Big Ten circles this season.
I do quickly want to touch on Purdue. First-year head man Ryan Walters has a first-year quarterback, at least first year at Purdue, because Aiden O'Connell moves on. So much production offensively in the pass game under Jeff Brom. You wonder, will Walters expect something similar out of Hudson Card, or do you rely a lot more on guys like Devin Mockabee and make this a more balanced offense?
It feels like in a lot of ways where Ryan Walters picks up the Jeff Brown program, there will be a lot of similarities, except Ryan Walters is going to be the guy running the aggressive defensive side of the football while saying, hey, I want to make sure this offense is going to be aggressive, is going to put the football in flight, is going to be everything it can be to put the football in the air. You can have Purdue fans who will be comfortable with that, and Hudson Card has certainly done that at his previous stops. Then having Graham Harrell as the offensive coordinator, I think that makes all the sense in the world to where Purdue fans were a little bit uncertain, a little bit unsure what it would be. There's every reason to be excited about the staff that's been put together and the approach that Ryan Walters is taking offensively.
Let's head around the Big Ten. It's soccer season. They call it football in Europe, but we can't have football at the same time as football. Rutgers women's soccer wins 2-0 on opening night. First goal of the season. Always just hits a little bit different. Our congrats to the Scarlet Knights on that season opening win. It was a busy Thursday in Big Ten women's soccer. Penn State, playing to a scoreless draw against North Carolina, had to deal with a lightning delay and the number 2 team in the country. Northwestern scores 4 in a win over Marquette. Michigan State shuts out Cincinnati. USC, number 22 in the country, just 1 goal needed as they beat future conference opponent Michigan 1-0. Speaking of current and future Big Ten teams, USC, Washington, Oregon, among those in the future category, all ranked inside the top 15 in the preseason top 25. If you think the Big Ten schedule is daunting in 2023, wait until you see what's on the slate in 2024. After the league has to go back, by the way, and adjust that +1 schedule. Because now we're going to have to be +1, +1. Right. There's way too much math, and I was told there would be no math on this particular television program. You look at USC as the highest-ranked future Big Ten team. Caleb Williams, Heisman candidate, comes back. Lincoln Riley is just going to continue to stockpile talent out in L.A.
And in doing so, not only at quarterback and receiver, but continuing to bolster the offensive line. I think that's a big part of what the Trojans' focus will end up being as they head into Big Ten play, because the program was somewhat depleted of depth. You know, there was front line talent that was always there with Clay Helton running the fray, but they weren't able to get to the point where he recruited at a high enough level to say that not only our starters are going to be able to compete at a high level, but the backups, the guys who rotate in. That competitive depth you need to really compete at a championship level, that's where Lincoln Riley can continue to bolster what USC brings.
Yeah, and just so close to getting into that college football playoff, and obviously that late loss, but a team that comes in with sky-high expectations. And there's no reason to think that that recruiting will do anything but increase in both its volume and quality when you bring in the rest of the country, because USC, yes, it's a national brand, but now you can sell it to everybody in the country, all the different places you're going to be playing, all the different networks you're going to be on. It's nothing but a help to Lincoln Riley and the rest of that staff. Washington comes in as a team that I think folks are sleeping on. I know they're top 10, but I think this is a national championship contender if Michael Penix stays healthy.
That's the biggest if, and it has been throughout the career of Michael Penix Jr., as we've seen from his time in Bloomington and then last season in Seattle. They have a spectacular atmosphere there at Husky Stadium. When you roll up and you're tailgating and the place is full, and structurally, I mean, it's similar in some ways to their Big Ten foe who they were able to defeat in Seattle last year, Michigan State. They'll face the Spartans in East Lansing this year. But because of the design of the stadium, there's a lot of volume to Husky Stadium as well. It echoes throughout when the crowd is rocking, and with all the points that Kalen DeBoer and Michael Penix Jr. put up with that Husky offense. And they have always, over the past decade plus, put a lot of NFL talent from the secondary in there as well. So DBs will continue to have the ability to take the football away at a high level. They got a couple of pass rushers up front also. We'll see how well they continue to stuff the run, but they got some guys who get after the quarterback.
Do they really call it sailgating?
They do. Yeah,
it's
a load of fun. I cannot wait to sailgate.
Yeah, I can't wait to get out there. Now, I have been to Autzen, because Eugene is another great place to see a football game. I was there for the Michigan State road game when Michigan State, Oregon went home and home. A couple of years ago. It was terrific. It's the Connor Cook era at Michigan State. And Oregon is just going to be a team that's going to be appealing for a lot of different reasons. And right now, they're playing some really good football, and maybe a little bit of a different brand of football that they played when they had all the success under Chip Kelly and Mark Helfrich.
When Mario Cristobal came in, he made sure that they were going to be more formidable on the line of scrimmage, and that's really a part of where USC began to lose some of those offensive and defensive linemen from Southern California. Part of that was because the Ducks were starting to sort of hoard in on their recruiting territory and getting some of the bigger bodies to Eugene as opposed to going to USC. But where Dan Lanning has picked up from where Mario Cristobal left off was making sure the line of scrimmage was going to be fortified for the Ducks. And there's not a lot of stadiums that I would be willing to compare to Kinnick. I don't do so lightly, but Autzen Stadium, you've seen it, is as electric, even though it's not the most massive stadium, but folks are into it. It's got a great design, all the pageantry you could hope for.
It's absolutely beautiful, too, if you're sitting on the correct side of the stadium, the landscape as the sun starts to go down. Now, to me, nothing rivals the Rose Bowl, especially the time when it kicks and when the sun goes over the San Gabriels. But Autzen's fairly close, and that's really, truly saying something. Before we wrap things up, I may have mentioned, you may have heard me talk about the fact that the show is going off the rails. I wish you could hear what we discussed during the break. Anthony dropped some interesting knowledge on us. I interviewed Lindsay Krause. We talked a lot about Taylor Swift, and suddenly Anthony said, "Oh, did you guys know I performed with Taylor Swift?" I mean, what?
So we lived in Nashville, my wife and I, for a couple of years, and she was a part of the opening skit for the CMT Awards in a given year. Belle Engvall was the host, a really great comedian. So Taylor Swift came in to be a part of the show open, the opening skit for the CMT Awards. My wife and I were there with her. So Kelly Pickler was involved, T-Pain was involved, as was Taylor Swift as the main star. So I was playing Taylor Swift's bodyguard in this opening skit for the CMT
Who is this
Awards.
guy?
I'm keeping Belle Engvall away from her. There's crowds everywhere trying to gather around. She was a big deal at that point. I frankly couldn't have told you the difference between T Swizzle and Kelly Pickler back then. She's continued to mount quite a resume in the years since.
Do you continue to get residuals every time she shows up?
You know what? I got to see. Maybe this whole conference realignment thing, we'll see if we can make that happen. Maybe we can recruit Taylor Swift to the Big Ten.
I mean, I don't know who your agent is, but if he didn't get you signed up for that, he should be your anti-hero. All right, now I'm done. I promise. For Anthony Herron, I'm Rick Pizzo. Thanks so much for watching this edition of Big Ten Today.
Don't hate.